Hey everyone, welcome back to Green Street, the series on this channel where we talk about building sustainable cities and resilient communities. In today's video, we're talking about why walkability is better for literally everyone, except for car manufacturers and fossil fuel companies. This is part one of a three-part series because every time I start researching a topic, I realize how much I want to talk about it. In part two, we're going to be going over how to build walkable cities, and then part three is going to go over the politics and the roadblocks to building walkable cities. But first, what's so great about walkability? In the 50s and 60s, leaving the city and moving to the suburbs was the dream. It was mostly people leaving the city to live out their suburban dreams. At the time, these sprawling communities where everyone had their little house seemed like a great idea. You could have your little car, you have all this space, and you don't have to live with neighbors that don't look like you. The American dream. The American reality is that these sprawling communities came at a cost to society. It was a terrible idea, and the only people that benefited were car manufacturers and oil and gas companies. And actually just capitalism in general. By the time we realized that building highways everywhere and living in McMansions was not a good idea, there was too much money in keeping the system this way. I'll get more into that in part three. But for now, we're stuck with this car-centric infrastructure until politicians decide that people are more important than money. It's not 2023, and the popular thing to do is to actually move to the city. Even with the cost of living crisis and a one-bedroom costing $2,000, Eras tour tickets, and your firstborn child, people actually want to move to a big city. And this is the complete opposite of what was happening in the 50s and 60s. So why is everyone all of a sudden wanting to be a city girl? There's actually a couple of reasons that living in a city is seen as a desirable thing nowadays. The food, the culture, the music, the arts, the pretty buildings, the walkability. Okay, so not that many people are going to say that they moved to New York City because it's walkable, but walkability is something that people enjoy even if they don't even know what it is. What exactly is it though? If you grew up in the US and you've never lived in or even been to a walkable city, you don't even know what you're missing out on. When I first moved to Paris, I could take the metro everywhere I wanted to go, and there was like grocery stores like a 3-minute walk from me. It took me living in a walkable city to kind of open my eyes to the fact that car dependency is kind of a curse. But I hope this video can kind of open your eyes to walkability even if you live in Indiana. So for the people in Indiana, walkability is urban planning terminology for the quality of pedestrian infrastructure in a city. So basically, can you walk in your city? But not like literally walk out the door, because that would just mean that you have functioning legs, but can you walk to the grocery store? Can you walk to work? Can you walk to a park? Probably more importantly, are you incentivized to walk to these places? The answer to whether or not you can or even prefer to walk to these places is going to vary based on how walkable your city is. So based on my research, there's kind of 3 broad components to walkability: safety, convenience, and aesthetics. If the pedestrian infrastructure, I literally can't say that word. I don't know why I put it in my script. If the pedestrian infrastructure in your city is safe, convenient, and nice to look at, then you're more incentivized to walk. And I'm going to say walk in this video, but I just mean how you move throughout the world. So whether you're walking, biking, running, sitting on a bench, using a wheelchair, you're a pedestrian, and this kind of infrastructure does impact you. And another thing to consider is that even though this video is focused on walkability, a lot of improvements to pedestrian infrastructure also benefits biking and public transportation. So it's just kind of good vibes all around. So let's go back to the 3 components of what walkability is, and we're going to start with safety. I think that safety is the most important component to walkability, because if it's not safe to walk around, then why would you do it? And I don't know about you, but the number one reason I don't feel safe walking around is cars. Cars are a menace to society. So a lot of safety issues come up when we build cities for cars. It wasn't until the passage of the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991, or as I like to call it, ICE-T, when kind of other modes of transportation like biking, walking, and public transportation became more of a consideration for people building roads and highways. This meant that before the passage of this law, pedestrians were barely an afterthought, and we're still dealing with the ramifications of that. When you look at the current numbers, it's really scary. So Montana put out a report going over these traffic fatality numbers and found that there has been a 59% increase in pedestrian deaths since 2009, between 2009 and 2020. And then along with that, a 9% increase in other car accident related deaths. Also, every 81 minutes, a pedestrian is killed, and every 9 minutes, a pedestrian is injured. Yikes. And this part is shocking as much as it is understandable, but alcohol is involved in 47% of these incidences. This is just kind of what happens when metal death cages are central to city design. In that Montana report, they cite the prioritization of efficiency and traffic flow as a potential roadblock to pedestrian safety. The other safety concern when it comes to walkability is just other people on the streets. When it comes to a lot of these social and environmental issues, they're all kind of interconnected, and walkability is a part of that. Any kind of crime, whether it's perceived or real, is going to impact the walkability of a neighborhood. And then other safety concerns are the condition of sidewalks, the functionality of crossing signals, and whether or not traffic laws are enforced. Convenience is the second component to walkability. Right now, most people drive because it's perceived to be the most convenient way to get around. And in most US cities, it is the fastest and easiest way to get around. But this isn't because driving itself is convenient. It's because we built cities to be convenient for cars, and we centered our lifestyles around using cars as a main mode of transportation. So of course it's going to be convenient. When you actually step back and look at other cities where driving is an option and not a necessity, you start to see how inconvenient cars actually are. I think the major one is just how expensive it is compared to other modes of transportation. Just buying a car itself is expensive, but when you factor in the gas, insurance, parking fees, and then the monthly maintenance of your car, then the price just keeps going up and up and up. Having a car is very expensive, but it's not even a partial slave. Other modes of transportation, specifically walking, are so inconvenient that leads people to just make space in their budget for it anyways. For a lot of people, walking to the grocery store could take an hour or more. And there's also a lot of places that you go to on a regular basis, like movie theaters, hair salons, nail salons, doctor's offices, parks. There's so many other places that you go to on a weekly basis, including work even, that being able to walk everywhere is just impossible for a lot of communities. And the reason that everything is so far away is because we've designed cities for cars. We build these shopping centers where everyone can drive their car, park it, go in, do some shopping, and then drive back home. This may be really easy and convenient for cars, but to everyone else that's walking, this sprawled out building design is just impossible to navigate. There's also zoning laws that require a certain number of parking spaces for each building that ends up taking a lot of valuable space within the city. Space that we could devote to other things that could make more money or honestly just look prettier than a parking lot. This sprawling city design may be great and efficient and beautiful for cars, but it comes at the expense of the local community. Outside of just taking up a lot of space, roads themselves are really inconvenient to navigate. If you live in a city, specifically close to a highway, then you probably know how annoying it is to have to go walk somewhere that's on the other side, because usually you have to go take a detour just to get to where you're going, and this ends up adding so much time to people's commutes. When it comes to highways in cities, I'm actually an abolitionist, because if people love their cul-de-sac communities so much, then why are we splitting cities in half with these loud and ugly highways? Just so people can come into the city to actually have fun. We shouldn't be building urban centers to accommodate people that don't even live there. I said what I said. Even roads that are in cities can be a big inconvenience for people. A lot of really fast roads that aren't even just highways end up cutting through communities and making it unsafe and inconvenient for people to get to the other side of something that used to be in your neighborhood. And when you keep increasing and adding one more lane, then the crossing distance just gets longer and longer and longer, and once again, it just is more unsafe for people. This is actually something that happened really close to my high school. They were developing some area just kind of wherever, and the street really close to my high school went from being like a 2-lane street when I was growing up, and then it ended up being like 6 lanes or something. They just added more and more every year, it felt like. And then another factor is mixed zoning, or more specifically the lack of it. So the way that we build cities now is we have the shopping centers or this cluster of businesses throughout the city, and then all the residential spaces are kind of next to it. This ends up being very inconvenient for people because if you don't live right on the edge of where that business cluster is, you now have to walk so far just to get to everything, versus when you have mixed zoning, everything is mixed, as the name suggests. So you just walk literally outside of your building and there's a bunch of businesses right there. And then other components when it comes to convenience is making sure that paths are direct and there's no roadblocks, crossing distances are shorter, and then also just having amenities for walkers like benches or what's the word? I almost said bubbler. I don't know why that popped in my head. Water fountains. And then the final category is aesthetics, which I'm going to talk a little bit about aesthetics and how it pertains to walkability, and then you can let me know how important you think aesthetics is to walkability. People like their walks to be comfortable and enjoyable. Makes sense, right? But the way that we build cities now is just not cute. Cars are actually my biggest enemy. That's why I'm making this video. But big box stores are really up there for things that I think we should just not do anymore. If you're not from the US and you don't know what that term means, it basically is a store in the shape of a box. Think like a Walmart or a TJ Maxx. They're just like big concrete blocks, and inside they look like warehouses. When you're driving, the aesthetics of these aren't really that bothersome because you're probably focused on driving anyways. But as a walker, when you're going on a 10-minute walk, right? And all that you pass is like Walmarts and Targets, it's just not enjoyable at all. This kind of building infrastructure is just really ugly and kind of depressing. I give kind of the comparison of a 15-minute walk in New York City versus a 15-minute walk in LA, and I've walked in both of these cities, so I can tell you they do not compare. So in LA, if you're going on a 15-minute walk and you're not like downtown, you're probably gonna pass by like big box stores. The sidewalk is probably gonna be like a patch of grass at some points. All the noise you're gonna hear, just cars. You're probably not gonna pass that many human beings either when it comes to walking in LA. Versus if you're going on a 15-minute walk in New York, there's actual human beings that you're probably gonna walk by. You're probably gonna pass by a bunch of local businesses. There's people outside. You're probably gonna pass by a cute little park, a little dog park, if you may. Just like the vibes of walking in LA versus walking in New York are not the same. And so I'm saying a 50-minute walk might be the same in terms of convenience and safety. Walking in New York City is going to be way more pleasant, aesthetically pleasing than walking in LA. And it kind of reminds me, yes, I'm going to talk about Paris again. This one time I walked like an hour to meet my friends at a bar just because it was nice out and I decided to walk, and it was a really pleasant experience. It was a great little workout, and I think that's the benefit of aesthetics is sometimes walking isn't a utility. Sometimes people aren't walking to go anywhere. Sometimes people are walking for fun. Sometimes people just want to go on a hot girl walk. So that's why I think aesthetics is so important to walkability, because it incentivizes people to just go out and walk, explore their city. And I couldn't make this video and not talk about trees. Really random, but trees are a big part of aesthetics, because when we're walking in areas, especially because, you know, New York City, concrete jungle where dreams are made of, this kind of like concrete like building infrastructure, as much as it's great for kind of building more dense communities, having greenery, trees, flowers planted everywhere is a big component to aesthetics, because it brings in nature to this otherwise like cold facade. And so that's why I wanted to bring up trees, but I think there's also utility to them outside of just aesthetics. It's been shown that streets where there's trees planted, the cars on those streets actually drive slower, and they're also just really great for the environment as well. So I love trees. We need more trees. Like if I was president, my motto would be build more trees, not build the wall. And then another factor that I put in aesthetics is sound quality. A lot of people complain that big cities are really loud, but it's not actually the city or the people. Obviously, the ambient noise is going to be higher because of human beings, you know, God forbid other people next to me. It's the cars that actually make a lot of the noise in cities, and you've probably noticed this where you're just walking on a calm street and then a car drives by and it's so loud. And cities like I think Amsterdam just have lower like ambient noise versus New York City, where yeah, it's walkable, but there's still a lot of cars everywhere. And because of the cars, it's louder. So if we had less cars in cities, then it would be quieter, which is more pleasant. I don't know about you. So let's talk about the benefits of walkability. And when I say benefits, this is giving 401k. There's so many great benefits when it comes to walkability. Just more broadly, when it comes to walkability, it's better for the environment, it's better for your bank account.
Guess what? It grows the economy. Benefits everybody. Hurts nobody.
It's better for like health, your health, public health in general. It's more equitable. There's just so many things I could talk about, and I'm going to touch on a couple of these things and kind of get more specific and share some numbers. But there's not that much research though. That's the issue. When I was going through looking for papers, reports, and things like that, there's not that many studies that have been done on this topic, so there's definitely a lot more that we can learn on how walkability improves communities. But I'd say with the research that we do have, I'd say it's pretty conclusive that there's a net benefit when you build more walkable communities, and really the only people that don't benefit are car manufacturers or fossil fuel companies, and I don't care if they're not benefiting from this. It's probably better that they're losing money from things like this. Thought I'd start out with the selfish one, in case you're like, okay, so why should I care about walkability? It's really good for your bank account. All I have to say is that walking is free. Okay, so obviously, even if you live in a walkable area, your transportation costs won't be $0, but walking is really cheap to do. But looking at the numbers, there was a study that found that communities that were more walkable spent 50% less on transportation compared to communities that were less walkable. Your potential to save on transportation costs is so high when you live in a walkable community. I'll use me as a case study, not super scientific, but since I've moved to Minneapolis, my per month transportation cost has been about $100. And that's also including, you need to include in that, I had to buy 2 bikes because I bought a bike, it got stolen literally as I was going to the Eras tour. That was such an expensive day. Then I had to buy another bike. It's August 22nd when I'm filming this, and so far I've spent $8 on transportation costs this month, which is obviously really low. I'm really lucky where I get to bike to work, and like grocery stores, all the important things I go to every week are really close to me. But even if I was taking like 2 Ubers a week, I'm never going to get to the level of monthly transportation costs of someone who has a car. Just like, it's almost impossible. Even like a monthly Metro Pass is probably going to be less than what someone is spending on car insurance and their gas every single month. I'm going to talk about equity a little bit later, but this reduced cost in walkability is specifically vital for people who really can't afford a car, but they get one anyways because otherwise they can't go to work and they can't go to school and things like that. So if the cost to consumers wasn't good enough to convince you that walkability is super awesome, another benefit is actually that it's cheaper for cities in general. So if any politicians, city people, Mr. President is watching this video, please build more walkable cities because they're going to save us money. So what factors into this from the research that I did is a lot of different ways that walkability saves money, but just like a couple of things, there's less crashes because there's less people driving. So that's a great way to save money from just all of the administrative things that comes with that. Also just the cost of life, you know, less people crashing is really good. Also the infrastructure, the cost to build roads is just atrocious. So if we have less of a need for these roads, then we're going to save money from that. So parking lots and car infrastructure takes up so much space within a city. So if you get rid of it, which I wouldn't mind, but obviously we can't just abolish all cars. If you at least reduce it significantly, then you have all this space that you can add parks and other buildings, housing, things that are really important and much needed in cities. But instead we just have parking lots everywhere that are honestly a lot of times just sitting unused. There was a study in Toronto that found that some parking spaces, even at peak hours, were only like 80% full. Why is this all this space just being taken up by something that isn't even being used. So in Brooklyn, they converted some parking spaces that were unused and turned them into a park, and it ended up resulting in a 172% increase in sales for the businesses in that area. That's crazy. And they also did similar projects throughout the city, converting unused car infrastructure into bike lanes for buses, other kind of amenities for people, and they saw like similar improvements when it comes to businesses in those areas. A lot of people are going to assume that parking spaces and car infrastructure and things like that are good for the economy, because then people will drive there, because if there's no parking, then who's going to drive there? There was actually a study, like I mentioned before, Toronto, they found that most money spent in local businesses were actually coming from people that weren't driving to get there, and that the local people in that community actually spend more. Another benefit when it comes to walkability is the social health, basically how we interact with other human beings, and the studies I found on this were really, really interesting. Walkability just, I don't know, there's just something about the community feel of it. I'm from a pretty small town where walkability does not exist. Like, the closest grocery store was a 30-minute walk away. It was very much so given suburbs, even though I didn't even live that far from downtown. What I mean by like the social aspect of it, if you've ever been to a city that's really walkable, I don't know, you meet people, not like literally where you like go up to every single person on the street, but it's just like you feel like you're in society with other people versus living in a place that's not as walkable, specifically suburbs. It's just really isolating because you live in your little box. Maybe you talk to your neighbors, but other than that, you don't really interact with strangers. It's not as social. Versus a walkable city, you just walk around, you interact with your community. In a study by the National Library of Medicine, participants reported having more social interactions after being in the study, and they also reported higher activity levels. This one's really interesting, but a study that was done in Boise, Idaho found that people in the city that were in more walkable parts had higher rates of civic engagement, so like voting and volunteering, compared to people who are living in less walkable parts of the city. This is one specific aspect of walkability where there's not that much studies that have been done, and even if there could be studies done, this kind of more qualitative research is hard to like do, and then it's also hard to kind of like extrapolate on that, like, oh, this means walkability definitely is going to make people vote more. And the other component is that there could be a chicken and egg situation in this, because maybe people who are more civically engaged move to walkable cities and walkable communities, and people who aren't civically engaged just decide to move to areas where they're more isolated, or people, when they move to a walkable area, become more civically engaged. So it's hard to know which it is, but it's also could be a case that both of them can coexist. So it could be both. One could be stronger than the other, but let me know in the comments which one you think is kind of more plausible and what your thoughts are on this kind of link between walkability and how someone feels about civic engagement and caring about their community. There's also a lot of health benefits when it comes to walkability, which could be really big in the US. There's a health crisis in the US, and part of it is the fact that we're not a very active country, like, at all. Biking to work has been a really big part of me being able to be more active, because otherwise I do be sitting in my little chair all day. I'm sure a lot of people have like similar experiences like that. Walkability could be really big in helping more people be active, because there is a strong link between a community being more walkable and people being more active. This is all, like I said, interconnected, because when you live in a walkable area, you're less reliant on a car, even if you have, oh my god, I don't know why I thought I could stand on one leg. Walkable communities allow people to be less reliant on cars and just use their legs more. That's a problematic thing to say. Move more. And because of that link between walkable communities and being more active, there's actually a link between walkable communities and decreased rates of certain illnesses like heart disease, hypertension, and high blood pressure. Wait, is that the same thing? I think I specifically wrote down that that's the same thing. And also certain cancers, which I think is crazy that walking can decrease your risk of cancer. Maybe it's the fresh air. Like I said, there's not that many studies on this. And then, of course, because it always comes back to cars, but when there's less people driving, there's less accidents and less people die in car accidents. You guys remember those numbers I threw at you earlier in the video? That was scary. The physical health is improved when it comes to a walkable community, and kind of correlated to that is the savings when it comes to public health. And it's because of all the improved health effects that the city now doesn't have to spend as much money treating these diseases that could have come. And of course, to tie it all together, along with the health benefits of walkable communities, is also the mental health benefits of walkable communities. This is especially the case in communities where there's a lot of green spaces and a lot of greenery, feels like you're in nature, a lot of parks, things like that. And then also just like the bonding, the community aspect of it. It's like less lonely when you're in a city and you actually interact with people. I feel like I keep going back to that because that's something that I definitely noticed being in a walkable community versus other places I've lived where it's not as walkable. You interact with more people. It's not always like you become besties with someone, but you just interact with more people and it feels like you're not on this earth alone. And of course, this channel is about sustainability, so I couldn't not talk about the environmental benefits of walkability. And obviously, I could probably make a whole hour-long video on just like the environmental benefits of walkability, but I'll just go over some of the benefits and links in the description to more resources where you can learn about how walkable communities benefit the environment. So even if you've never heard of the heat island effect, you've probably felt it. I am feeling it right now, literally in my apartment. It was so hot today. I normally don't sweat, but I'm literally just melting. So the heat island effect is basically when urban centers have higher temperatures compared to just the surrounding area, which would indicate that the temperature in the city could be lower if it wasn't for certain things like a lot of concrete, a lot of places for the heat to reflect and absorb and just make everyone feel like they're in an oven. The heat island effect is something that's felt more in less walkable areas because they tend to have more car infrastructure like roads, versus areas that are more walkable don't have as many of that, and they also with that have a lot more green spaces, which kind of minimizes the heat island effect. Not to mention how much energy is saved in general when there's less cars on the street, both from building all of this infrastructure, repairing all of this infrastructure, plowing the streets. Just a lot of energy goes into car infrastructure, versus if there was less of that and more walkability, then less energy would be going. And then also, of course, gas. We can't not talk about it. We just need to drive less is all I need to say. And when people are given the option to not drive, then that can actually happen. I know in environmental movement, we talk a lot about solutions, and I can say all I want. Hey, if you want to be more sustainable, you should walk more versus driving everywhere. But some people literally can't even walk to the grocery store. So if we kind of invest more in walkable communities, then people can make those more environmentally conscious decisions, or even better, get rid of their car. Another one is just noise and air pollution, because like I said, I feel like I talked about cars a lot in this video because it's almost like the opposites. Like when I think walkability, I just automatically think less cars, more buses, bike lanes, people walking, versus a community that's not as walkable. You have more cars, which obviously emit a lot more when it comes to pollution compared to other modes of transportation. Walking emits like 0. So in Paris, they actually had a car-free day. I believe this was in 2012, and they saw a 50% reduction in smog levels. 50% just from one day of like people not driving. Actually, I just looked at my notes. It was actually in 2015, but same thing. They saw a 50% reduction in smog just because less people are driving. And there's also this kind of accidentally happened literally worldwide because of the pandemic. Less people were driving because, you had to stay home. And just around the world, there was all these stories about how much less pollution there was, both air pollution, but also just pollution in general. A lot of rivers just were cleaner because there was less people dumping things in them. It's kind of crazy to think that so technically we can live like that. if you think about it. Another big one is more efficient land use, because like I talked about earlier, mixed zoning, dense communities are kind of essential to walkability. And when you have that, you just take up less space. Like, there's more people in a concentrated area, so you don't have to destroy natural environments to build up these subdivisions. And it's also more energy efficient when people live in close proximity to each other. And then also you're able to have more mass transit. I kind of want to make a video about it now, because I feel like I brought up public transportation or biking a lot in this video, but maybe I'll do a 3-part series on biking infrastructure. All in all, more walkability means less emissions, less pollution, and it's just overall better for the environment. I'll bring up trees again just because, like I said, I love trees, and walkable communities, specifically incorporating green spaces, also means having more trees, and those are great for cities and the environment. Overall, walkability just leads to less carbon emissions, and imagine if carbon offsets were just investing in walkable infrastructure. Imagine if companies doing carbon offsets was them tearing up parking lots and making them into parks. So hopefully this video was a good overview of walkability, kind of what it is, how it benefits people, how it screws over the corporations that I personally and you probably hate the most, and why overall I think we need more of it. The next time that you go on your hot girl walk, kind of look around and see how walkable your city is, and let me know in the comments. What issues have you had with the infrastructure in your city? What improvements do you think could be made? And how walkable is your city? Like I said, this is a 3-part series, so come back to part 2 where we're going to talk about how to build walkable cities, and then part 3 we're going to get into the politics, and I love politics. It's gotten me in trouble on this channel, actually. So that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, of course, like it and subscribe to get that notification. Thank you to my patrons for helping me make amazing content. If you want to support my Patreon, I'm going to link it in the description. But that's it for today's video, and I'll see you in my next video. I'm also going to go take a really long shower because this heat